PJ, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, my name is PJ Rohall, co-founder of About Fraud and Fraud Fight Club, which is our in-conference, in-person experience. Started that back in 2017, but honestly, my prevention journey started back in 2011 when I worked as a fraud analyst, more on the merchant side. Worked in fraud operations for about 7 or 8 years. Then co-founded About Fraud just as a side passion project to aggregate some resources and honestly bring together things that you don't study fraud prevention, really get certifications. You have different levels of expertise, but if you want to learn from reports or podcasts or blogs or they're disparate. So we kind of wanted to put them all in one place. And then along that journey, it became my full-time job. I've also worked on the solution provider side too. So I've gotten to see a couple different kind of vantage points and really excited to be on this entrepreneurial journey. And as far as purpose driven, it feels very purpose driven with where fraud, financial crime, and especially scams is kind of evolved into in 2025.
So, I don't think there's any real courses in college hey, this college is great on fraud prevention courses. How did you get into the field?
Yeah, and it's interesting. We have on our website universities, and some of them, we just basically list out universities that have certain risk management, fraud management, cyber that bleeds into fraud. So there are some things out there, more and more probably as we evolve, but not nearly enough. And so I got into it. I studied finance and business because I was like, well, that could make me a lot of
Yeah.
money. That sounds cool. And then I had a diagnosed anxiety disorder and OCD, but not a well-managed anxiety disorder and OCD. So I not managing it well and then taking a job in Manhattan in finance, in retrospect, was not the best choice. I essentially had a nervous breakdown
Mm.
in 2008, and I returned home to figure out what is going on with my mind and mental health. Especially as we've evolved into scams and the psychology of scams, it's weird how those things
Yeah.
intersected later in life. But I, got the support I needed. Kind of, it's always a management process, as you know, whether you have a diagnosis or not. We all have human minds. So, but once I felt like I was in a good place to join the workforce, I studied at a pretty good university, good degree, and figured I should put that to use. Um, but I realized through that process, I didn't like finance. I mean, not what I was doing at least. So I was open. I guess that's the silver lining there to something new, something different. And I saw a job as a fraud analyst with a company called GSI Commerce at the time. They were then shortly after acquired by eBay, and it was called eBay Enterprise. And so they work with a lot of suites of traditional merchants. This was back in 2011. And it was a fraud analyst reviewing orders, seeing if they're fraud, seeing if they're
Yeah.
not. I was like, that sounds different. I don't like fraud. I feel like I should help out there. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do there. I didn't know where that would exactly take me. The only bet I was making was fraud was not going away, scams were not going away. And the way I knew the human mind was, man, it's a journey, and good, bad, the whole spectrum. It's a spectrum, and human beings are always going to be trying to deceive folks to get ahead, in whatever way that means, financially or otherwise. So I was like, well, let me see if I can learn as much as I can in fraud operations and figure out the rest later because I think the industry will be around for a while. So that was a good bet. Fraud operations, we were talking right before this, it's not glamorous when you get started. You're, entry level, you're not getting paid a ton. As you move up, of course, you can do a little better from a seniority or a financial standpoint, but it's it's a very much kind of growing area.
Yeah.
Fraud in general is a growing industry. So we're piecemealing together data and tools. The experts, if you're blessed with a good mentor, a good team you're on, that's the best way to learn. They show you the ins and outs, what to avoid, how to kind of go through your investigations. If you want to go the more analytical path, how to build rules or machine learning models. If you want to go into people management, going that route. But that's honestly, that's how I got into it, and that's how I learned the most was working in a fraud shop, as they call it, a fraud prevention shop, and failing a lot and not understanding what I was doing and being okay with that. And those things actually translated really well into the entrepreneurial
Yeah.
journey too. So, yeah, that's how I got in.
It's neat because I remember back in my youth, I worked for at the birth of the internet, worked for an e-commerce company, and with kind of when you could start buying things online and affiliates and things like that. And I was working on the team that was looking at all of the online orders. And it's interesting that once you've been doing those sort of things for a while, that you just look at an order, you go, it just doesn't feel right. You,
100%. 100%.
it's like it's not the dollar amount. There's just something like there's
What,
something that
what,
works in the back of your mind. It's really interesting.
yeah, and all the teams have different, things that show red flags and risk scores and all that, but that's exactly what it got to be. You would pull up an order and sure there's things that are, glowing red or things that just don't look right, but you could quickly digest and be like, no, this doesn't look good. I mean, you know, buying five PlayStations at the same time doesn't always look great.
Yeah,
Now, there's always a story, we're actually doing it for a business. We're going to raffle these off for a charity. But most of the time, especially if you ever got on the phone with the actual fraudster, they would make up this elaborate, story. I have five grandkids. I'm going to give each one of them one. So just going into something a little different, the hardest part in non-obvious fraud cases is those edge ones because there's
yeah,
plenty of good orders. And the business that you're working for is all about making good customers happy.
yeah,
And they don't want things canceled for fraud, especially if it's not fraud. So you're looked at this kind of cost center, you're impeding growth, you're
yeah.
impeding revenue. Nobody really wants to fund it until the bad thing has happened. So it's I played goalkeeper in soccer, and it reminded me of kind of like, you're kind of like the last line of
Yeah.
defense, and no one really looks to you until something really bad happens. So just comparing professional and whatever athletic career I had, yeah.
Yeah, it's you're never remembered for all the fraud you did stop. You remembered for that one fraud incident that you didn't stop.
Yeah, yeah. And then unless you kind of find people who get what you do, and that's, I don't want to jump too much into about fraud without maybe talking about some other things, but that's our community is about connecting with like-minded folks, people who kind of get what you do, your peers, what they might be a level above you, a level below you. They might work at a bank or a merchant, but it's a very unique industry of people who um, want to find their tribe of people.
Yeah,
It helps phone a friends, people who are going to be there when you were like, man, I got hit by this fraud attack. Usually they're always changing. Usually they have something you haven't thought of. And to be able to lean on somebody who in turn then can lean on you, that's powerful. And also people
yeah.
who work in fraud prevention are really proud of the work they do because they can connect the dots to the real human impact that they're having. So that was one of the thought processes, thinking a community might work really well for this industry.
I know. I'm going to be intentionally vague here, and I apologize for that. I know some people that they they're not C-suite in their company. They report to the C-suite, and they have good relationships with the people that report to the C-suite at their competitors,
Mm.
and they compare notes on a variety of things like, hey, are you seeing this, are you seeing this? I know we're not supposed to be talking because we're competitors, but in the terms of our job functionality, we're on the same, we're doing the same thing. Do you have any insights here that I can help, that I can use? And it's
Yeah,
interesting to see people share despite the competition at the corporate level.
yeah, especially on the banking merchant, I'll say the users of the technology. The vendors, it is a little bit different of a ball game. You're trying to scale your rules, machine learning, behavioral biometric, identity verification, just fill in the blank solution. And you're less likely to probably collaborate at that level. But if you're working for a bank, you're working for a merchant, you're working for an insurance company, fraud happens in every industry. But then it's a little different, right? Like, your bank wants to, open up more accounts and sell more credit cards or
Yep.
whatever it is you do. But the fraud teams, if they're not crushing you, they're going to be crushing them, and then they're going to be crushing somebody else. So it's in the best interest to collaborate and share tips and tricks, and it's not gonna immediately, or I think even maybe ever, affect how your company does versus the other company. We don't have the luxury of that. If anything, we need to band together and collaborate more. And everyone's, oh, we need to collaborate like fraudsters do. They're on Telegram, they're on the dark web. Yeah, they don't have any rules. They don't have also have many morals. And it's like, that's not realistic, but how can we do better? How can we incrementally do better? Which is what our community and what Fraud Fight Club is getting people into person is to do better. And there's conferences and there's other communities and there's certification communities and there's loads. We are taking our own kind of unique approach to it. But I say the more collaboration, the better, and getting the people there who are actually kind of part of this fight and equipping. And that's essentially our job. I'm an enabler in hopefully a good way.
Yeah.
I'm an enabler of relationships being connected, of resources being connected. And, if you're working at one of these jobs full time, you don't really have all the time to network and,
Yeah.
research all these things and go to maybe a million conferences. But if we can get you more connected and you don't have to find every fraud expert within your four walls of your company, then that's going to really help you kind of upscale your career, but also just the value you're adding to the company that you're protecting.
Yeah. So before we get too much further into the conversation, I did want to ask you the question that I try to ask most of my counter scam, counter fraud, cybersecurity people is, have you been a victim of a scam or fraud or someone close to you that you have a story to tell?
Yeah, so well, it's a great question. Fortunately enough, mine has been the vanilla version of fraud, which is, credit card, you get your money back.
Yeah.
A lot of the traditional unauthorized payment fraud activity where there's reimbursement and thankfully not being manipulated psychologically or emotionally like scams. But I will say on a couple points, anybody is vulnerable to this. I think breaking the stigma on this is one of the most important things to making some strides in scam awareness and having more people open up and tell their story. If you go through a scam, no matter whether you're vulnerable or not, you experience psychological trauma and shame because we look at scams as even the word doesn't really
Yeah.
amplify it enough. People's lives are being ruined. Some people's lives are being taken in the case of, just off the top of my head, sextortion scams.
Yeah.
Like there's so much bad stuff going on. So, yeah, vulnerable populations, elderly, even teens who are getting wrapped up in different types of scams. But there's more vulnerable populations, but everybody. I'm a 42-year-old, somewhat tech savvy, definitely fraud savvy individual. But we've had people like me, or even more tech savvy, who have come forward with stories of them being scammed. I remember writing one or allowing somebody to publish their scam story as a fraud expert. And that's powerful, right? Like it's powerful to see people who are not your prototypical scam victim telling their story. It normalizes it. It normalizes having a brain and human emotions. And I can say, whether it wasn't a scam, but I can say I have been flooded by emotions. I mentioned OCD and anxiety. That's my particular thing that is tough for me. And when I look at the decisions I make when flooded by emotions and urgency and then look back on those, they're not. It can feel like it's not the same person making
Yeah.
those versus a kind of a bit more level-headed, emotionally stable. And I don't mean that in a stable versus super unstable. I mean, we all go through stability and instability,
Yeah.
you know. I have two kids. If something's wrong with them, I'm trying to stay calm, but that those emotions are flooded. So I think we just need to be realistic about who the actual scam victims could be, which is everybody.
Yeah.
And then we also need to be realistic about how it's being perpetrated these days versus 25 years ago when email was newer and we were getting Nigerian prince scam emails and we were like, okay, haha, this is a silly thing no one would fall for. Maybe, maybe not, but it's nothing close to that anymore. It's strategic, organized, in some cases, organized crime from overseas with big business models behind scamming
Yeah.
that are putting so much effort into it to manipulate even the most, we'll say, savvy of individuals. So it's a great question. I'm glad you asked that question, actually.
I mean, it's interesting because most of the people that I've talked to who my guests who have shared about it, um, it's interesting because like we are inundated with scams every day. In some sense, we're so inundated by that we almost don't even notice it. I get, that random, hey, I'm running late for the meeting
Yeah.
SMS message. Okay, it's a scam. You get that random phone call. Like, there's so many weird things that we get that we dismiss because they're not contextually relevant to the moment in our lives. But
Mm.
it's when there's a great story one of my guests was telling that he had bought something online that was being imported from another country. He knew it was coming from another country. And so he got an email saying, "Hey, there's a package for you that's held up in customs and we need you to do some paperwork." It was like, "Okay, it's I any other day he would have thought it was a scam, but because he was expecting a package, he started to do stuff. They got into it, and why is my password manager not filling out the password? It's like, oh, that's not the real site. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's when it's in context with something that we're doing. All of our spidey senses don't go off. The
Yeah.
processes that we would normally go through don't trigger because it was exactly what we were expecting to happen in our life.
Yep. Completely. I think the more we can look from outside of our own vantage point, I've gotten a million turnpike pole or
Yeah.
toll, things. I've gotten, and we can all laugh about those things. And it's like, but if someone's seeing that for the first time, if they have something where it's like, shoot, I might have gone through that toll, and then it's different. And I think with the blaming and the shaming, and this is a larger probably societal issue where it's a lot easier for us to just explain how other people are stupid than kind of look at, well, what is the problem? Do you think anybody was willingly like, oh, I can't wait to get scammed?
Yeah.
And there does need to be a personal level of responsibility. So there is a tricky balance there. But I think, um, we get nowhere shaming and throwing folks under the bus. We get a lot of places by showing empathy and understanding and asking questions, frankly, about what they're what they were doing at that time. If we're trying to dissect ways to kind of educate victims in the future, and that's a whole nother topic I know
Yeah.
we might get into. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, to me, that's the really interesting thing is that this community has changed over the last, I started the podcast, about 5 years ago now, but even the mentality since then has really changed, that there's a lot more empathy than there was 5 or 10 years ago towards people that have been a victim. There's a lot more understanding that this is not a intelligence issue, that, oh, well, they're just not a smart individual, so of course they're going to be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
That there's a lot that, this is big organized crime, big business, and they're employing, significant psychological practices into how they do and what they do and how they interact with people, that, if you and I aren't prepared for kind of like psychological warfare,
Yeah.
how can we ever expect to get it right?
Yeah, and we're in. the industry, I'll say, of learning about this stuff, being exposed to it. It's part of the solutions in the market that are out there. It's part of the people I talk to, the teams they work on. They might not work in specifically scams, but we, for better or worse, are on high alert for people deceiving one another.
Yeah.
Like it's just, what if you're not? What if you're just living your life and whatever level of technology acumen you have or whatever it is, and this is just something you come across, right? Like so it's my scam education dream is to get outside of our bubble.
Yeah.
And it's great to talk about in our bubble because then you can educate family members, you can educate schools, you can educate wherever you can in your community. But getting outside of our bubble and getting on the loudest microphones with the farthest reach, and I mean them kind of, metaphorically or figuratively in the sense of, streaming platforms, social media, influencers, people who have wide reach and actual like structured campaigns that have these PSAs that are way overdue. I
Yeah.
mean, we get emails from our bank, great. And if to be fair, the bank's job is to educate you, but they're not sitting here. These I don't want to say they're not creative. I want to say that they're a bank, right?
Yeah.
So they educate their consumers just like they would like, hey, the APR of your credit card is going up, blah blah blah. And some of them do some interesting things where they try to send emails and texts that say, I will never ask for your one-time
Yeah.
password. And could there be advancements in education? Sure. Could there be advancements in the way that they detect fraud? Absolutely. That's a different conversation. But um, I don't think it's on just the banks. It shouldn't even come close to being
Yeah.
on just the banks especially from an education standpoint. Like from a societal, and then you break it out into countries, government standpoint, what are we doing here? Like, what kind of steps are we taking to inform our citizens of something that's well beyond financial fraud? And when it's financial fraud, it's devastating amounts of money. It's not hundreds of dollars, it's
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars and the psychological trauma and that kind of suffering is kind of the next level. So there's ideas I have, and then there's ideas of what I think other groups can kind of step up and do. But I think we're just so far behind the awareness and education curve that mainly takes advantage of people outside of our industry, even though people in our industry still obviously can fall victim to scams.
Yeah. So there's two things that popped up in my mind in that conversation is that I've seen like the two-factor authentication messages have changed from when they first it used to be here's your two-factor authentication code, and now it's here's your two-factor authentication code. We will, like, if you're talking with somebody, do not give this to them.
Yes.
And it's like, okay. And the more that we see that, the more we're going to realize I should only ever be entering this in on a form on a website, and I should never be giving these to somebody over the phone, particularly when it says don't ever give this to someone over the phone.
Yeah.
And last year I was in Singapore, and I was looking out the window of the hotel room, and there was an electronic billboard. And Singapore is very figure out the polite word for this, a very strong government in the sense of we have a lot of PSAs. They want to do a lot of uh, reinforcing, be nice, treat people well. Like there are ways that you need to behave in society, and the government's going to try to educate you and enforce that. And there was this big sign on the outside of the electronics sign on the outside of a conference center that was if you get a phone call from a number that you don't know, stop. It could be a scam. And this was like a PSA on a building. And then I kind of on the rest of that trip, there was out at the shopping center. It was little billboards saying if you see this, it's likely a scam. Don't do that. And it's like, oh wow, like there, this country is taking the anti-scam like into the streets, and
Yeah,
it's not just, hey, I'm your bank, don't give people your passcode. But it
yeah,
was, we're, as a government, we're going to try to educate you on the broad scopes of, think twice before responding to these sort of things.
definitely. And I've seen that's great. And obviously, every government's going to have their own way of how they want to enforce things for better or worse. But I do think in the US, I mean, it's a bigger country. It's a lot more banks. It's a lot more citizens. But there's got to be some type of cohesive, overarching message and campaigns. And of course, you can have different nonprofits and people
Yeah.
chipping in. But you see in other countries, again, maybe not at the scale of the US, not the size, but doing, I think it was in UAE, like clever like videos on YouTube and like almost like a music video
Mm-hmm.
about, not falling for scams. And in the UK, you have an organization called Take Five that does some things. Australia, I think, is on the forefront of, well, I'm not sure it's just education, but it's, how do we from a regulatory
Yeah.
standpoint, not just talk to the banks, talk to the social media companies, talk to the telecom. And that's a big point of contention in the US is, you have these scams happening upstream from the banks.
Yeah.
And I use banks, credit union, anywhere you can make a payment,
Yeah.
basically. And there's really nothing incentivizing them to put in more scam controls,
Yeah.
social media. And I'm not going to throw any specific company under the bus, but social media, telecom as a bucket, there's more opportunities there, and there's more opportunities to do stuff with the bank. But when you're a bank and pretty much everyone's going to where the thing ends and the liability ends,
Yep.
it is in the full picture, right? So, and before that happens to anybody, the education and the awareness, I think, is such a big piece of it, and doing it in from different, like a government, as opposed to just, your bank sending something,
Yeah.
or a nonprofit being nice enough to kind of jump in the fight. But coming from, and you might not want to learn everything in your life from sports and educational, or like educational things from sports or actors or musicians, but they have a platform, man, and people
Yeah.
listen to them, and they do all kinds of nonprofit work. So why is something I call scamfluencers, which is a work in progress, why is that not a thing?
Trademarked.
Yeah, trademarked. But and actually, I've thought to myself, as I've gone in many conversations about scams, I throw scamfluencers out there, and then the ego part of your mind is like, well, somebody could run off with that idea, and I'm like, you know what? I hope somebody runs off with that
please,
idea,
please do.
and does something that is more meaningful, right? Like there's people who have platforms, and I think part of the problem is the people who have these platforms don't know how bad it is,
Yeah.
right? And everyone's going to have their causes. There's physical illnesses. There's other super worthy things you would do PSAs for or raise money for, whatever it is. But I think if some of these folks learned the magnitude of it, and unfortunately, I think some of these more well-known folks will, whether it impacts them or loved ones they've
Yeah.
had. I've seen Sandra Bullock reach out kind of publicly about some scams. I don't think it was something that happened to her, but somebody was trying to, I think, manipulate her sister-in-law, or something along those lines. But these this is much more pervasive in society, I think, than we think,
Yeah.
and it should be talked about, no matter the medium, no matter the person, and frankly, if you have a bigger outlet, then use that for good, for scam education.
I mean, I think that comes back to the destigmatizing victims of scam and fraud, that for so many years, they have, people who've been victimized have been treated as, well, it was your fault. You shouldn't have done this. If you had just done this, it's not about, you know, if someone comes up and randomly beats you up on the street,
Yeah.
no one goes, well, it was your fault for the guy with the pipe hitting you. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't
That's a good
instigate the fight.
example.
Like,
Yeah.
how is that my fault? But that's exactly how so many victims of scam and fraud get treated as well. It's their fault, and of
Yeah.
course they're not. Of course people are not going to want to come forward under that environment.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And like, what if, so you could argue, what if the person could have had more, been a little safer in how, like in the physical. So maybe
Yeah,
you go jogging through a neighborhood that's not the greatest neighborhood, or you go jogging at night, or you do something like that. But if something bad happens to that person, I really hope, and I'm pretty sure no one's looking at that person saying, "Well, you shouldn't have been there at that time." Yeah, maybe
yeah,
there's some back channel scattered talk about, well, that wasn't, the wisest choice, blah blah blah. But the central theme is around the person who got attacked as a
yeah,
victim and the person who did the attacking. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And how do we raise awareness? It isn't to say, "What an idiot. I wouldn't do that.
yeah.
Therefore, let's just throw it to the side."
I mean, no one looks at a bank robbery and says, well, gosh, the bank just should have had four armed guards instead of three, and then it would
Yeah.
have been okay. Well, gosh, if they didn't have all that money at the bank, they wouldn't have been robbed.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And
like no one blames the bank when the bank is robbed.
I think when you think about it, you mentioned the internet. I
Yeah,
also remember when it came around. I was a little younger and doing the dial-up and that old awful noise and AOL Instant Messenger when I was a teenager. But it's new. Social media is really new
yeah,
in the scheme of life, or so. I think it's a bad convergence of a lot of things,
yeah,
right? So all these things are, even online shopping is, in the grand scheme of things, not all that old. So you have all these ways to connect with people. You have all these ways to digitally get their money. You have all these ways to digitally manipulate
yeah,
them, and we're not really, we're catching up on a security standpoint, whether it's credit card fraud all the way to, really bad scams. And it was never, with credit card fraud, it was the banks taking the liability and
yeah,
saying, "Hey, the loss has come to me," or the merchant. There's different rules on that. And it was like, okay, citizens' life goes on. Annoying. You have to get a new credit card shipped out to you. Life
yeah,
goes on. But as you got more to faster payments, bank-to-bank transfers, Venmo, Zelle, in other countries, even earlier, the UK was like 10 years,
yeah,
15 years ahead of us with faster payments. And not surprisingly, they felt the brunt of scams sooner because it was like, wait, I can tell this person to send this amount of money to my bank account and I can immediately take it out. Like that's wow,
yeah,
wow. That's a whole nother, and that's what fraudsters in general do. They look for areas of opportunity. They look if there's a good ROI and they pounce on it. They're business people at heart, the
yeah,
good ones, the bad good ones, but the good ones. And so all of this is relatively new, and then there's also this problem of it going across industries. So you have one company where it starts, goes to a different industry,
yeah,
another company, and it's like, who owns this? Like, who owns this problem? And government's like, wait, what? This is that bad of a problem? Um, and not to mention, if you've lived in any country, there's like a million other problems going on
yeah,
too. So how does this get to the front and center news issue? And I think that is, a challenge, and that's also where I think more prominent people speaking about it will get media attention. It just does. When I say something, ABC News is not ready to interview me.
yeah,
I don't think so, at least. And when somebody else says something, Taylor Swift makes a tweet, it is top of news.
yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, okay, Taylor. So all the Swifties need to ask Taylor to talk about scam prevention.
There you go.
Hey,
There you go.
get in touch with either of us. We'll be happy to help give you talking points.
Or Ryan Reynolds. For some reason, Ryan Reynolds always comes in my head as like a kind of quirky guy that would go out there. I think it's because he has like Mint Mobile commercials,
Yes.
and you see those, and he does things like the soccer team with that other guy, and so if anyone knows Ryan Reynolds, just contact me. So
We'd be happy to facilitate a discustion
I promise
on a campaign.
I'm a completely normal person. No.
So, like, are there other like approaches we should be doing differently than what we have been doing? I mean,
Yeah,
clearly, like
so
I think getting influencers on their soapboxes, talking about it and explaining it, and trying to
yeah.
destigmatize it is massive. What are some of the other things that we can do differently?
Yeah, a bit more traditional and also kind of downstream. So once this stuff gets to the banks or the FIs, I remember working in merchant fraud, and when there was a problem, whether it was a customer calling in or a person pretending to be the customer who was used as a fraudster, I get on the phone and say, "Let me resolve your issue. Let me, sorry, we canceled it for fraud. Let me get it reprocessed." That was a uncomfortable
Yeah.
conversations. I ruined too many kids' Christmases probably by canceling their orders for fraud. My bad. And hopefully I didn't really ruin anyone's Christmas. I had basically, they got their item. It just was like a day or two later. So I don't want anyone thinking I ruined Christmases. But those conversations I remember made me super anxious. Imagine that, but you're at a bank and somebody calls up and says, I've lost $200,000 to a scam. What do I do? I am in a state of panic and anxiety and probably eventually depression or some type of psychological and emotional states that people who are working on the phones handling fraud and scam cases are really not equipped to handle.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all to say, I think, and I've seen a little bit of a trend of this, hiring and employing actual psychologists, people who understand human behavior, um, to kind of revamp that whole journey, that customer journey, not from how they're going to buy a banking product, but if a scam might be occurring, has occurred, the victim's calling in, wherever it is in that journey, how can we design this process from a standpoint of understanding that person's psychological state?
Yeah.
If it's too late, and we need to support them from what are the next steps with an empathetic kind of lens that people need to be trained in. Okay, how can we do things upstream in the banking journey, digital or in person, where we can ask questions and be inquisitive about why they want to send $35,000 to an account they've never sent before overseas, right? Like
Yeah.
there's delicate, it's a really delicate conversation, and there's people who have studied psychologists, not me, who who would have advice that is might be counterintuitive to what you think, because like what you want to say is this is fraud, this is a scam,
Yeah.
why would you do that? And that can have that cannot be the best approach. There
Yeah.
can be other ways to interact with the customer, to design products with that in mind, to design warning messages. Okay, I'm about to make a transfer. I see this in Zelle. It's like this is a new recipient. Beware of scams. Those are great steps. So, and that's not easy, right? Like
Yeah.
those are things that take, if it's designing a whole product journey, and that's product teams, that's years of, not years, but months of planning, and years maybe in the roadmap to get to roll out that product. Um, and you can't probably realistically, if you're a financial institution, hire armies of PhD
Yeah.
psychologists, right? Like that's not affordable, nor is it. It's just not a feasible thing. But how can we? There's great. I don't think they would mind me saying this, but there's a great person, Elizabeth Hoopert, who we and I probably butchered her last name, who works for JP Morgan Chase on their scams team and was hired for just that reason. And she came to Fraud Fight Club, our conference, to kind of provide a different perspective. She is a smart PhD student, graduate with a really strong understanding of behavioral science and psychology that can offer Chase something that a banker or a fraud fighter can't. And it was, I think, a very forward thinking move of them to bring someone like that in. And I
Yeah.
know other banks and financial institutions are thinking of things like that. So I think thinking differently than what we've traditionally done is one thing, and these type of psychologists are one example of that. But also, there's more and more technology on the market that is designed for specifically scams.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there used to be ones that were very fraud focused, basically unauthorized, like it's a different thing than when it's the authorized person,
Yeah.
the customer saying, "Hey, I want to make this payment." So, um, banks, merchants, any company that is willing to invest money and budget into procuring technology to help protect their customers is what we should be doing. Now, that can be a confusing journey to get budget. Wait a
Yeah.
minute, do we have any losses? No. Well, then we're not spending money on it. That can sound very heartless. What do you mean? Your customers are falling for the um, so I think I can't make those decisions for companies, but I do think we're reaching an inflection point where your customers are going to look at institutions that prioritize their well-being from a scam perspective.
Yeah.
And if they see others leading the charge in that, they're going to say, I'm not going to bank here. I'm going to bank here. I'm not going to buy my product on this marketplace. I'm going to buy here. Like, how soon that happens and how you fit that in your business case, I'm not sure. But I think more forward-thinking institutions are putting aside budget to maybe hire a psychologist, to maybe institute a scam tech tool that is, more new or cutting edge, or whatever that means. Um, and are not strictly looking at did we lose money where we are accountable for
Yeah.
it. Like that's one lens, and maybe in the USA, in the UK, there's liability for banks in certain cases, and a lot more cases in the US. Um, the government right now is not looking like anytime soon it's going to impose regulations that say the banks are liable. But that doesn't mean that's the only reason you should get technology or resources and think differently. And man, there's loads of other reasons that you could be at the forefront, and you can. I've been talking for a good bit here, but you can spin that conversation to be this is a customer experience, a revenue generating exercise. This isn't a cost savings.
Yeah.
You can be at the forefront of a crowded field of businesses that are not talking about scams at their forefront. Heck, bank, you can be the one that contracts with Ryan Reynolds to bring
Yeah.
you on as the person who's leading that. And I'll even let you steal that idea. So, anyways, those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is this. Yeah. Any business who's you're at a disadvantage if you're a major financial institution if you're waiting for the government to require you to change.
Yes.
You really don't want to be in that position where the government says, okay, well, you now have 30, 60, 90, 3 years to hit this goalpost. You better be working towards that goalpost before they tell you you need to work towards
Absolutely.
it.
And that was a succinct way of summing up some of the things I said. Thank you.
It's easy because I heard you communicate it. So, if people want to learn more about what you guys do, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, potentially a little too much, but I don't dive in any other social media other than that, and I try to keep it somewhat interesting. So, I mean, my personal LinkedIn, always feel free to reach out about fraud just two words, about and fraud on LinkedIn, and our website, aboutfraud.com. There is a dash in there, but honestly, if you just Google us, you can find us. Fraud Fight Club. So Fraud Fight Club is our conference. We like to call it a club, not a conference, but if you want to actually understand what it is, it's not someone's basement where we're beating the crap out of each other. Um, it is a club. It is something. It's more of a community of like-minded individuals who professionally work in fraud prevention and want to connect with other people who have that passion and have that interest. So Fraud Fight Club has a website, has a LinkedIn presence, um, and you can email me at pj at aboutfraud.com. There is a dash between about and fraud. So, but I would imagine if you have any digital savviness, it won't be hard to find me.
And we'll make sure to link to the about-fraud.com as opposed to the one without the.
There you,
We'll link to the right one in the show notes.
there you go. There you go.
PJ, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and giving me some time to air my thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you.